Today, we open with a question that sounds almost impossible when the world builds dams of concrete. Why would Ibrahim Traoré choose living builders small, tireless creatures to rescue a river in Burkina Faso? If you've been following Africa news, you know this landlocked country has carried a heavy cross-dry wells, cracked earth, and families watching their gardens turn to dust. But what happens when leadership refuses despair and reaches for creation's own wisdom? Picture a classroom in Bobo Dioulasso. An old teacher, thin as a reed but steady as a cedar, remembers a year when the heat pressed so hard he closed school at noon. Children fainted during spelling tests because the walk for water stole their strength before the day began. He kept a pitcher on his desk. But some days, the pitcher was hope more than help. Then a new message came from the capital, a bold plan to carve an artificial river, a long ribbon of life to catch the seasonal rains and carry them across the land. In the first months, fields that once withered began to glimmer green. Cattle found clear pools. Mothers filled pots without counting the miles. For a moment, it felt like a prayer answered. If God sends water to the thirsty, can we be wise enough to keep it alive to guard it the way we guard our children and our homes? That's the heart of this story. And for viewers in their 60s and beyond, who remember when neighborhoods looked after their own, this isn't just Africa news. It's a reminder of what communities can do when faith meets duty. If this stirs your conscience, share the thought with someone who still prays for rain, because sometimes the smallest stories water the deepest roots. But here's the riddle. Why choose beavers? Yes, beavers for a man-made river in Burkina Faso, who believed they could turn a project into a living system. The artificial river was not just an idea on paper. Under Traoré's direction, hundreds of kilometers of canals were dug, connecting villages like veins feeding a thirsty body. The soil was leveled, embankments shaped, and rainwater was captured in a massive man-made channel stretching toward the horizon. It was unlike anything the people of Burkina Faso had seen in decades, a project that reached into the heart of the dry season and pulled life from the dust. At first, there was skepticism. Some said it was a waste of money, others laughed, calling it a politician's showpiece. But as the first year passed, their doubts began to crack. Crops that had failed for years now bent under the weight of grain. Cattle drank without wandering for days. Children who had never seen a flowing river splashed and played in its shallows, their laughter mixing with the sound of water. In a way, it felt like the Nile in ancient Egypt, a lifeline carved by human hands to feed both the land and the spirit. For one teacher in Bobo Dioulasso, the river was more than a source of water. It was a sign that his students could return to their desks instead of trekking for hours in the sun. Mothers began tending gardens behind their homes, growing peppers, tomatoes, and greens without waiting for the rainy season. The river had given them more than water. It had given them back their rhythm of life. But as anyone who has lived through both feast and famine knows, blessings can be fragile. And soon, a shadow began to creep along the riverbanks, a reminder that even the best of human efforts can face nature's test. It began quietly, just a slowing of the current in certain stretches of the river. The water that once moved like a living thread began to stand still in the heat. Silt settled on the bottom. Fallen leaves and debris gathered along the edges. And in the still pockets, the air grew heavy with a faint, sour smell. Then came the mosquitoes. Villagers who had been celebrating clean water now found themselves battling fevers. Fish that once darted through clear channels floated lifeless to the surface. Farmers complained that the water for their crops had turned cloudy, and in some places, tinged green with algae. The same voices that had once praised the river began to murmur that it was cursed. In the capital, advisors brought Traoré reports and proposals, industrial filtration systems, motorized pumps, chemical treatments. They came with glossy brochures and confident promises, but also with staggering price tags and a hunger for electricity the country could not spare. Traoré listened, weighing each idea, and then remembered the failures of similar projects in neighboring nations. where the machines fell silent within years, leaving only rust behind. Instead of chasing technology that would burden his people, he turned to the wisdom of the earth. He called together hydrologists, ecologists, and engineers, some from across Africa and others from as far as Europe and North America. For days, they studied models, history, and the quiet lessons of rivers that had thrived for centuries without a single machine. And then came a proposal so strange it made the room fall silent. Beavers, not the metal-toothed saws of industry, but the living teeth of a small, tireless creature, a natural engineer, able to sculpt waterways into balanced, self-cleaning systems. Most in the room had never seen one. Many doubted it could work. Some even laughed. But Traore leaned forward, his eyes steady. If nature can heal herself, he said, let us give her the tools to do it. When the first beavers arrived in Burkina Faso, they were small bundles of muscle and fur, blinking in the sun as they were released onto the riverbanks. To most villagers, they looked harmless, almost comical. These little creatures are going to fix the river, one woman in Kaya asked with a laugh. They chew wood, not water. The beavers worked without pause, felling slender riverside trees, dragging branches into the water, packing mud and grass to form small, sturdy dams. These structures slowed the flow just enough to keep water moving while preventing it from standing still long enough to breed disease. As sediment settled, the water grew clearer. Insects that had spread illness declined. Fish began returning. And even birds that had vanished years earlier came back to nest. For families along the river, the change was tangible. That same woman in Kaya who had laughed at the beavers was now filling her cooking pot each morning from the river itself. The water clear enough to see her own reflection. Farmers spoke of healthier crops, stronger livestock, and children free from the fevers that had plagued them just months earlier. Politically, the project cemented Traore's reputation as a leader, willing to defy convention and foreign dependency. Supporters hailed it as proof that Burkina Faso could solve its problems without bowing to Western technology or debt. Critics, however, warned that such independence might deepen tensions with foreign powers. Some saw the beavers not just as animals, but as a quiet declaration Burkina Faso would choose its own path. Even if the world did not understand it, news of the Beaver project spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across Africa, environmental groups and rural development advocates praised it as a breakthrough proof that low-cost, nature-based solutions could rival expensive industrial systems. In Mali and Niger, agricultural leaders quietly sent teams to study the river, wondering if the idea could take root in their own lands. In Moscow, Traore was welcomed as a guest of honor, his environmental vision tied to a broader image of national independence and resistance to foreign control. In Washington and Brussels, the reaction was more complicated. Officially, Western diplomats offered polite recognition of Burkina Faso's innovation, but behind closed doors, analysts worried about the growing influence of Russia and the symbolism of rejecting Western-funded infrastructure. For U.S. policymakers, the project was a double-edged sword. It demonstrated African self-reliance, which they could publicly applaud, but it also hinted at a strategic realignment in the Sahel, one less dependent on American or European aid. Experts debated the long-term viability of the Beaver model. Some saw it as a scalable, climate-resilient approach that could stabilize entire regions. Others argued that without ongoing oversight, natural solutions could falter under extreme droughts or floods. The future of the project became a point of quiet observation in embassies and think tanks. If it thrived, it could embolden other nations to reject conventional aid packages. If it failed, it would serve as a cautionary tale against romantic environmentalism. As one American commentator put it, Burkina Faso may have just placed a bet that nature can outbuild concrete. The world will be watching to see if they win. Yet even as the water runs clearer and the fields grow greener, there are whispers of the challenges ahead. Climate change still stalks the Sahel, with droughts that can last years and sudden storms that can undo months of balance in a single night. Political pressures, both domestic and international, will test whether this model can survive beyond its first bright success. Still, for the farmers who plant without fear, for the children who play in water without sickness, and for the elders who see life returning to the land they thought lost, the Beaver Project is more than a policy, it is a promise. A promise that solutions need not come from steel and concrete alone, but can be found in the quiet genius of creation itself. And so, a question remains. Is Ibrahim Traoré the green hope of Africa? Or is this only a brief miracle before the desert reclaims its reach? The answer will not be written in speeches or reports, but in the seasons to come, in whether the river still sings 5 years from now. If the Lord entrusts us with a river, He entrusts us with the duty to keep it alive. And perhaps, like the Beavers, we are called not to command nature, but to walk alongside it patiently, faithfully, until the land itself testifies that we have been good stewards.